Today, we're diving into a legal case that turned on one single, incredibly important question. And the answer completely redefined the balance of power between a person and the state when it comes to mental health.
So let's just get right to it with a question for you. Imagine you are being held against your will. Who do you think should have to prove you're okay to be released? Should the burden be on you to prove you're well? Or should it be on the state to prove you're not? Your gut reaction to that is really at the core of everything we're about to talk about. So why is this question such a big deal? Well, to really get it, we need to understand the system of mental health detention and the safeguards that are supposed to be in place. It's all about this tricky balance between keeping people safe and protecting our fundamental right to be free.
Okay, so the law is pretty clear that a person can be detained if they're considered a risk to themselves or maybe to other people. But taking away someone's liberty like that is a massive deal. It's supposed to be temporary, and it's supposed to be looked at very, very closely. So what's the main check on that power?
That brings us to the Mental Health Review Tribunal. Think of it as an independent court. Its whole job is to look at a patient's case and decide if keeping them detained is actually legal and justified. This is supposed to be the critical safety net.
But here's the problem. For the longest time, these tribunals were working with a massive legal blind spot, and this created a huge dilemma for them when they had to make their most important decision.
You see, the law just didn't say. It was totally silent on one absolutely crucial point. When a case is being heard, whose job is it to convince the tribunal? And that little gray area had some pretty massive consequences for patients. And just think about that for a second. Those are two wildly different questions, right? They create completely different starting points for the whole hearing. Is the default position freedom, or is it being detained? Who has the built-in advantage? And this whole thing, it all comes down to a really important legal idea. It's one that's key not just here, but in our entire justice system. And that concept is, who bears the burden of proof? The burden of proof is just a fancy way of asking, who has to do the proving? The best way to think about it is with criminal law. We presume someone is innocent until the prosecution proves they're guilty, right? The state has to carry that burden. The big question was, what's the rule in mental health cases? And this right here, this shows you exactly what was at stake. If the burden is on the patient, well, they're in a tough spot. They have to prove they're well, often when they're at their most vulnerable. But if the burden is on the hospital, then the state has to constantly show why detention is still necessary. The whole game just flips. Well, something had to give. This confusion couldn't go on forever, and it didn't, thanks to a huge landmark case brought for a patient we only know as H. It finally pushed the courts to make a call. And this wasn't just some local court decision. No, this case went all the way up to the Court of Appeal, which is one of the highest courts around. This was a big deal. They had to give a final, definitive answer on this fundamental question. And this quote? Wow. It tells you everything you need to know about how the court was thinking. They didn't start with the details of the Mental Health Act. Nope. They started with a basic human right, the right to liberty. Everything else had to fit around that. The court's logic was actually beautifully simple. First, the right to liberty is the default. It's where we all start. Second, taking that right away is a serious step, so it has to be justified, not just once, but continuously. So third, who has to provide that justification? Well, it has to be the state, the hospital, the one doing the detaining. It's a straight, powerful line of thinking. So the final verdict came down, and it was unambiguous. The burden of proof is on the detaining authority. The hospital, not the patient, has to convince the tribunal that detention is still absolutely necessary. The default position, legally, is freedom. Okay, so a court made a ruling. What does that actually mean in the real world? Why does it matter so much? Well, the impact was immense. This wasn't just some minor legal tweak. It was a fundamental shift in the power dynamic. Suddenly, the rights of patients were front and center. The scales of justice were rebalanced. The ruling sent this incredibly clear message. Liberty isn't something you have to earn back. It's a fundamental right the state must justify taking away. And that forced hospitals to be way more rigorous and accountable. And if there's one thing to take away from all of this, let it be this simple fact. This ruling ensures that someone can't be kept in a hospital just because the situation is unclear or because they find it hard to make their own case. The state has to prove its case every single time. So this case put a really important safeguard in place. But it gets you thinking, doesn't it?
When we give the state the power to take away our freedom, even for our own good, what other checks and balances do we absolutely need to have in place to make sure that power is always used fairly?